My daughter pushed the kitchen door open, bright and eager. Her voice rang out, warm and cheerful, that sweet tone I hadn't heard in months. "Dad, I'm here. Let's just get this paperwork sorted out. You'll feel so much lighter." Then, she saw the woman sitting at my dining room table. She froze, the manufactured smile on her lips hardened like cement. The pristine navy blue folder in her hand stopped halfway through the air. Her entire body went still, like someone had pulled the plug, cheerful 1 second, terrified the next. My daughter, Renee, 39 years old, a polished, ruthless corporate executive, yet in that moment, she couldn't force out a single syllable. Behind her, a lawyer in a pressed gray suit stood frozen stiff. He didn't understand what was happening either. The air in the room felt heavy, thick, with the tension of an ambush. 3 months before, I would have given up almost anything just to get her to visit me. Now here she was, and I wished she had never come. Because there is something worse than your child never visiting you. It's when they finally show up, and you realize they didn't come for you. They came for what they thought was theirs. My name is Walter Boyd. I am 68 years old, and I live south of Charlotte, North Carolina. For 41 years, I ran a commercial heating and air conditioning business. Nothing glamorous, just heavy-duty vans and 100-degree crawl spaces. Before that, I was 1st Infantry Division. Combat engineer. My youth was spent in places where a mistake meant you didn't go home. The military taught me how to read structural weaknesses, spot concealed threats, and maintain absolute discipline under fire. I brought that discipline to my business. I started with 1 beat-up used truck. By the time I sold the company, I had 11 crews. When I retired, I figured the world would slow down. I stopped setting an alarm clock. I drank my coffee on the back porch. Retiring isn't about doing nothing. It's about finally having the power to choose. Most Thursdays, I met my buddy Gene at the Sweetwater Grill. I drove the same dented Chevy Silverado I'd had for a decade. It fired up every single morning. That's all I ever asked of anything: reliability. I never lived like a man with significant wealth, because I never thought of myself that way. Turns out, somebody was watching my quiet life closer than I knew. My daughter Renee projects a flawless picture of success. She and her husband Brad lived in a sprawling development where every house is beige, every lawn manicured. They drove an oversized luxury SUV, and, as I would learn, they carried an impossibly bigger mortgage to finance the whole illusion. When she was young, we were inseparable. Especially after her mother died. Renee was 15 when we lost Carol. For years, it felt like it was just the two of us against the world. I was the one at the softball games, gripping the chain-link fence. I was the one doing the driving lessons in an empty church parking lot. Then, somewhere along the way, the foundation cracked. There was no single argument, just little erosions, the slow weathering you only notice after a long time. The phone calls got shorter, birthdays shrank to a generic text message, visits got rare. When I called her, she was always slammed at work. When I asked her to come by, there was always an excuse. At first, I blamed life. People get busy. But then the questions started, out of nowhere. She'd call and ask things that didn't sound like her. Her tone would be overly sweet, coated in artificial concern. "How's the old house holding up, Dad?" "It's a lot of maintenance. You keeping up with all the bills, okay? Ever think about moving somewhere smaller? An assisted living community?" Little questions, probing the perimeter. Harmless, I told myself. Then one night last fall she called. After some hollow small talk, she asked if I was still handling all my own money. I laughed. "Who else would be doing it, Renee?" "Oh, nobody," she replied quickly. "Just wondering. A lot of people your age get overwhelmed, that's all." She rapidly changed the subject. "If you have ever had someone you love start asking questions, wearing the deceptive costume of deep concern, you know that cold prickle on the back of your neck. Your instincts flare up, but you suppress them. You don't want to be suspicious of your own flesh and blood. So you swallow the doubt. I swallowed it for months. My military instincts screamed that I was being flanked, but my heart refused to listen. The event that shattered my denial came in early spring. Curtis, a guy who used to run heavy ductwork for me, called one Saturday. After we talked about fishing on Lake Norman, the line went strangely quiet. Curtis cleared his throat. "Walt, I got to ask you something. You doing all right up there?" "Last I checked, Curtis." "Why?" He hemmed and hawed, then finally spit it out. "Renee's been telling folks you're having memory trouble, saying you're forgetting things, getting confused. She told Jim down at the hardware store that you're becoming a danger to yourself." I stood absolutely still at my kitchen window. The bird feeder was empty. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. A phantom ringing started in my ears, like after a flashbang goes off. My own daughter. She was actively moving through my community, telling people my mind was decaying. Preparing the battle space, seeding the narrative, I kept my voice dead level, thanked Curtis, and hung up. I stood there in the silent kitchen for a very long time. That phone call didn't make me angry. At first, it made me dizzy. There is a special kind of evil in someone using your own mind against you. They are systematically trying to make you disappear while you are still standing in the room. They are stripping away your autonomy, isolating you from everyone you know. If you've ever had someone maliciously twist who you are to get what they want, you know it makes you doubt yourself first. You wonder if maybe they're right. That is exactly what the tactic is designed to do. Gaslighting is a weapon of psychological warfare, and my daughter was deploying it with terrifying precision. A week later, Renee called. For the first time in nearly a year, she was warm and sweet. She asked about my health, my daily plans, my finances. Then, very casually, she floated the idea of stopping by the house. Not alone. She wanted to bring a lawyer to help me get some paperwork organized. "Everybody should have this stuff in place, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with fake empathy. "It's just for your own protection." I agreed to meet. I played the part of the compliant, tired old man perfectly, but something deep down in my gut had gone completely cold and terrifyingly quiet. The father in me stepped back, the combat engineer stepped forward. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at a faded photograph stuck to the fridge. It was Carol, Renee, and me at the beach in Wilmington in 2004. Renee had a cherry snow cone dripping down her hand and a massive grin. I wondered whether my own daughter still saw me as her father, or if she just saw me as a bank account she was impatiently waiting to access. I hated myself for thinking it. That's the honest truth. But I am not a man who ignores a threat. If she wanted to treat me like a target, I needed to gather intelligence. So, I picked up the phone and dialed the one person in the world I trusted with my life. I called Diane. Let me tell you exactly who Diane Carver is, because my daughter Renee fabricated an entire narrative about her that was never true. Diane was not an old flame. She wasn't a secret girlfriend. Diane Carver is a former military logistics officer who ran the back office operation of my HVAC business for 15 solid years. When Carol got sick and medical bills started piling up, Diane stepped in. She covered payroll. She ruthlessly managed the schedule. She would drop off hot supper at my house and literally stand in the doorway until I promised I would eat it. She was my closest confidant, my brother-in-arms in the civilian world. But 15-year-old Renee didn't see it that way. She decided Diane was an interloper after my money. No matter how many times I calmly tried to explain the reality, that toxic belief sat in her mind like an immovable stain. When Diane finally retired and moved to the dry heat of Arizona a few years ago, Renee was visibly relieved. I figured time would wear that childhood resentment down. I figured wrong. I hadn't talked to Diane much recently. A Christmas card here, a brief birthday call there. But that night, sitting in the dark kitchen with the crushing weight of betrayal on my chest, I called her. We talked for 2 hours. I wanted somebody who knew me well enough, who had seen my mind work under pressure, to tell me straight up if I was losing my edge. By the end of the call, Diane's voice was dead serious. "Walter," she said, the military clip returning to her tone. "I'm booking a flight. I'll be there in 48 hours, 3 weeks later." Well before Renee's scheduled visit, Diane landed in Charlotte. The first thing she did was demand I spread every single financial record across the dining room table. We turned that room into a tactical operations center. We went to work. The second thing she did was start asking the hard questions I had been afraid to ask myself. Who had access to what accounts? Who had suddenly gotten so intensely interested in my banking routing numbers? And then the hidden truths started surfacing. Small cracks in Brad and Renee's flawless beige facade. An old commercial client mentioned he'd seen my son-in-law, Brad, at some aggressive, high-risk real estate investment seminar downtown. Then, somebody from my old church mentioned Brad had been drinking at the Sweetwater Grill and talking a little too loudly about cash flow being dangerously tight. A third person said Brad had tried to trade in his luxury SUV, but was buried so deep in negative equity that the bank laughed him off the lot. Slowly, a terrifying shape came into focus: debt, massive, suffocating debt. It was the classic trap of arrogant people trying to look wealthy. A $90,000 luxury truck, 5-star vacations financed entirely on high-interest credit cards. A highly leveraged, speculative real estate investment that went completely sideways. They were stacking credit cards on top of credit cards. It was a deep financial hole that desperate people desperately try to hide. Until they can't anymore. Even seeing the pattern, I kept reaching for another explanation. Maybe they were just struggling. I would have gladly given them a loan if they had just possessed the basic human decency to look me in the eye and ask for help. But then, Diane found the piece of intelligence that took the floor out from under me. She was systematically sorting through a stack of recent bank correspondence. Suddenly, she went dead still. "Walter," she said. Her voice dropped an octave. It was the tone she used years ago when a supplier tried to cheat us. It meant incoming fire. She slid a single stapled page across the table. The document itself was visually unremarkable. What mattered was an attached inquiry log. Next to it, a formal record of someone repeatedly contacting my financial institution, asking detailed questions about the legal mechanisms required to gain unilateral authority over an elderly parent's liquid assets. There were no signatures on the paperwork, no names explicitly spelled out, just recorded questions. What documentation is required to establish power of attorney for a parent experiencing cognitive decline? Can assets be frozen and transferred to a primary caregiver prior to a formal medical diagnosis? How fast can a residential property deed be transferred into a trust controlled by the child? The timing of the calls lined up perfectly with the exact weeks. Renee had been calling me, casually asking how the house was holding up, and whether I was forgetting to pay my bills. The person making those aggressive inquiries, mapping out the route to seize my life savings, was my own daughter. I sat there at the table for a long time. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly. Diane didn't offer empty platitudes. She just let me sit in the wreckage. Finally, I rubbed my face with my scarred hands. Maybe she's just trying to plan ahead. Maybe she really thinks I'm sick, Diane. Diane looked at me. The overwhelming sadness in her eyes nearly broke me. "Walter," she said softly but firmly, "do you really truly believe that?" God help me, I didn't believe it for a second. But I desperately wanted to, because the other version of the story hurt far too much to hold. I barely slept that night. I lay there in the dark, running every single conversation we'd had over the last year backward in my head. Every sudden burst of fake concern. Every time she had subtly suggested my memory was slipping. And the pattern that I had stubbornly refused to see lit up, clear and bright as a flare, over a night battlefield. Renee wasn't getting ready to take care of me. She was getting ready to take over. She was going to use my money to bail out her husband's catastrophic financial failures and lock me in some cheap assisted living facility to get me out of the way. If you found out your own child was actively plotting your financial execution, I don't know how you would sleep either. When the sun finally came up, the grief was gone. The denial had burned away. What was left was cold. Hard military precision. They thought I was just a tired, senile old handyman. They thought I was an easy mark. They had severely underestimated their target. They were about to find out exactly what happens when you try to ambush a man who spent his life learning how to dismantle threats. The legal papers Renee finally brought over looked completely harmless. They were impeccably clean, professional, and perfectly organized in a heavy navy blue folder. Little yellow arrows pointed helpfully at every signature line. If you only glanced at them, you'd think they were ordinary planning documents. In my family, they felt exactly like a heavily reinforced, locked door that someone was smiling warmly while handing me the key to. Diane and I sat down the morning after the folder was dropped off. We read every single page. The house was dead quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the sharp scratch of Diane's pen on a legal pad. Diane was exceptionally good with microscopic details. Back when we ran the business, she could spot a $100 billing mistake from across the room. She was dead right this time, too. She read the entire stack of documents twice. Then, she took out a red pen, circled a thick paragraph, and looked up at me. "Walter," she said, completely devoid of emotion. "This gives Renee a whole lot more power than she let on." "How much?" I asked. "Enough to make unilateral decisions about your accounts, your property, your long-term investments. If certain conditions are claimed." My stomach tightened. Claimed by who? That is exactly the problem. Claimed by her. The legal language buried the execution under soft, reasonable-sounding words. Prudent, necessary, best interest. But in practical application, it was devastatingly plain. If I signed on those arrows, my daughter could seize broad, immediate control of my money on the sole argument that I needed help managing it. It wasn't a forgery, but in the wrong hands, it was a wide-open door to complete financial ruin. And I finally understood whose hands those were. That afternoon, Diane called the lawyer who drafted the documents. Kevin. She put him on speakerphone. I sat at my kitchen's table, trying not to feel like a helpless fool. Kevin was polite at first, professional, careful. Then Diane asked him what exactly he had been told about my mental condition. There was a long, awkward pause. Ems Boyd expressed severe concerns about his ability to manage certain complex affairs. The lawyer finally said. I sat up straight. Diane's eyes cut sharply to me. "Which Ms. Boyd?" Diane asked, her voice like ice. "His daughter, Renee. What kind of concerns exactly?" Another pause. Papers shuffled. Memory issues, significant confusion, trouble keeping up with basic bills, possible vulnerability to outside manipulation. I looked down at my hands. Hands scarred from 40 years of bending sheet metal. But they were not helpless hands, and they were not confused hands. Diane stayed perfectly calm. "Did you ever actually meet with Walter Boyd before you drew these sweeping documents up?" "Kevin?" He hesitated. The silence was damning. "No, I was told by Renee that it was highly time-sensitive and that he had already agreed in principle." I almost laughed out loud. I had absolutely not agreed in principle. I had agreed to listen to my daughter. There is a massive canyon between those two things. After the call ended, Diane sat quiet for a minute. "He's not the villain here, Walter." "I know," I said heavily. The lawyer had been handed a fabricated story by a polished executive, and he believed it. That didn't make the betrayal any softer. It just proved how effectively Renee had weaponized my age against me. For the next few days, I carried those documents in my head like a sharp rock in my shoe. I'd be brushing my teeth and hear my daughter telling a total stranger that I was vulnerable. I'd drive past my old HVAC shop and my chest would cinch up tight. And the crazy, pathetic thing is, a part of me still wanted to defend her. I kept building excuses. Maybe Brad aggressively pushed her into it. Maybe she was genuinely terrified about their collapsing finances. Maybe it really did start as worry, and it just slowly rotted into something darker. That's what we do. As parents, we keep hunting for the good version of our kids, even when the undeniable evidence is sitting right on the dining room table. One night, I couldn't sleep at all. I got up around 2 in the morning and stood in the dark kitchen. On the fridge was a picture of Renee at 6 years old, holding up a tiny fish she'd caught at Lake Norman. She was grinning, massively. I reached out and touched the worn corner of that photograph. And for one dangerous second, I actually thought about just signing the entire damn folder. Just to make the tension stop, just to keep my little girl, just to buy her love with my life savings. If you have ever loved somebody who was systematically destroying you, you know exactly what that gravitational pull feels like. You know that insidious voice that whispers, "Maybe if I just give them what they want, I get to keep them." That voice is a liar. But Lord, is it convincing at 2 in the morning the next day? Diane came over with a fresh manila folder and a face that told me she hadn't slept either. It was a heavy, bone-deep exhaustion. "Walter," she said quietly. "Sit down." I sat. She laid out 2 printed emails, correspondence from an old contact in commercial real estate. The emails confirmed that for the last 2 weeks, Renee and Brad had been aggressively asking around about my specific neighborhood. They wanted recent sale prices. They wanted to know exactly how fast a brick ranch house like mine would move. They had called it planning ahead. That phrase again. I stared at those printed pages. My house isn't a mansion, but it is mine. Carol picked out the floral wallpaper. I built the back deck myself in the blistering July heat. Renee's height is still penciled inside the pantry door frame from 6 years old to 15. The pencil marks steadily get higher, and then they brutally stop, and my own daughter had been out in the corporate world, casually discussing the liquidation of it like it was a used riding mower. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I sat there in absolute silence. My military training took over, flooding my system with cold, calculated adrenaline. Diane waited. After a long while, she touched my arm. "I'm sorry, Walter." That was the exact moment the suffocating guilt finally started to lift. I still loved Renee. That would never change, but loving somebody doesn't mean standing perfectly still while they pull a tape measure out, measure the floor you're standing on for auction. For the first time in a year, I stopped asking whether my daughter would really hurt me. I started asking how far she was actually prepared to go. By the first week of July, I had completely made up my mind. Not just about refusing to sign the papers, about all of it, the house, the money, the narrative. Most importantly, I decided I was absolutely done being a passive spectator at my own funeral while I was still breathing. But I didn't want a screaming match in a lawyer's office. I didn't want a chaotic blow-up where the truth is left muddy. I wanted the facts exposed in the broad daylight, where they could never be twisted or denied later. So, I decided to throw a cookout, and I prepared to unleash hell. Every 4th of July, I invited folks over to the backyard. Neighbors, old co-workers, extended family. When the invitations went out, nobody thought a single thing of it. Renee and Brad RSVP'd yes almost immediately. That told me everything I needed to know. They confidently believed I was going to sign their documents. They thought this was a victory lap. The 4th came up sunny and brutally warm. Around noon, I got the large charcoal grill going. Burgers and brats sizzled, sending smoke across the yard. Neighborhood kids ran wildly through a sprinkler. A Bluetooth speaker played country tracks. My neighbor Roy spent 20 minutes lecturing a captive audience about why his grass was greener. For a few golden hours, it felt normal, almost. But I could feel the cold reality sitting heavy in my chest, ticking like a concealed explosive. Renee arrived around 3 o'clock. Brad trailed lazily behind her, carrying potato salad. He walked up and shook my hand firmly, grinning like a politician. Renee hugged me. Quick way too quick. The second she pulled away, her eyes started aggressively moving around the yard. Checking the perimeter, hunting for signs of weakness, or making a mental inventory of the assets she was about to liquidate. I saw it. I didn't say a word. Diane showed up a little while after. The second Renee spotted her, that manufactured smile pulled tight. I caught it. By 6 o'clock, almost everybody had eaten. The sun was getting low, shadows stretching long across the grass. That felt like the moment the tactical window had opened. I stood up and loudly tapped my glass with a metal fork. The talking slowly trailed off. The music was turned down. Everybody casually turned my way. I cleared my throat and thanked them all for coming. I looked around at familiar faces, good, honest people who had known me for decades. Then, I turned my head and looked right dead at Renee. "Diane and I said, my voice projecting clearly, have spent the last several months getting my affairs in order." I watched my daughter's posture go instantly rigid. Brad stiffened, and I learned some extremely interesting things along the way, I continued. The yard got quiet, real quiet, the heavy, suffocating silence that falls right before a storm hits. Nobody knew where this was headed. I didn't point an accusing finger. I just started laying out the raw intelligence, piece by piece. I told the crowd how I had recently heard from a trusted friend that I was supposedly losing my memory, that I was confused, that I was a danger to myself. Heads immediately started turning. Renee's face froze solid, the blood draining from her cheeks. Then, I picked up the heavy navy blue folder from the table. I held it up. I laid out the precise nature of the legal documents my daughter had presented to me. The aggressive request for unilateral control over my life's savings. The secret, documented questions somebody had been asking a financial institution about how to bypass a formal medical diagnosis to seize an elderly parent's assets. I delivered it with zero drama, just cold, irrefutable facts set down one after another, like heavy cinder blocks. I watched the shockwave move physically through the crowd. First came profound confusion, then deep discomfort, and then severe, judgmental concern directed entirely at Brad and Renee. Renee broke the silence, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "Dad, that's not fair." I looked at her, perfectly calm. "Which part isn't fair, Renee? Which part is a lie?" She opened her mouth to argue, and nothing came out. Hard, documented facts are awfully hard to argue with. When 40 people who have known your father for decades are staring a hole through you. Brad jumped in, his face flushed red with defensive anger. "You're making this sound way worse than it was, Walter. We were just trying to help you manage things." I nodded slowly. "Then explain it to the crowd, Brad. Explain the inquiries to the bank. Explain the emails about the property value of my house." Dead silence. For just a fleeting second, looking at him squirming in the trap he had built for me, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost then, Brad made the fatal mistake. It's the kind of catastrophic error people make when they are completely cornered, terrified, and the ugly truth comes flying out of their mouth before their panicked brain can stop it. He threw up his hands in deep frustration and yelled, "Fine. But what about the inheritance? We have a right to know what's happening to it." The entire yard went dead, utterly dead. Even the kids near the sprinkler seemed to freeze. You could hear the ice settling in the plastic coolers. A woman standing near the back fence slowly turned her head and stared down at the grass in sheer embarrassment. Brad had just screamed out loud the one toxic word everybody had been mentally circling for the last 10 minutes. Inheritance. He heard it the exact second it left his mouth. His face went a sickly shade of gray. But it was far too late. You cannot unring that bell. He had just publicly confirmed every single accusation I had laid out. I let that single greedy word hang there in the hot summer air for a few agonizing seconds. I wanted everyone to really sit in the stench of it. I wanted Renee to feel the full crushing weight of public exposure. Then I reached into a thin manila folder resting beside my chair. I just wanted everything documented, out in the open, and fully witnessed by the community. "It's funny you should aggressively bring that up, Brad," I said, my voice deadly quiet. Renee looked like she was praying for the earth to open up and swallow her whole. "I sold the house," I said. The words hit the grass like a dropped anvil. Renee blinked rapidly. "What?" "3 months ago. It's already closed. The new owners take possession at the end of the summer." Brad stared at me, his mouth hanging open. "Walter, what the hell are you talking about? You can't just sell the house." I almost laughed. Their absolute, profound shock was just so completely real. They had spent months meticulously mapping out a future based entirely around a major asset that hadn't legally belonged to me since early spring. I also moved nearly every single liquid asset I have into a heavily fortified, irrevocable trust, I said, driving the final nail in. A while back, Renee's face went paper white. The exact same terrifying shade of white it had gone the day she first walked into the kitchen and saw Diane sitting at my table. She finally realized she was completely, permanently locked out. Then I gave them the final piece, the part absolutely nobody in that yard saw coming. "Before either of you desperately tries to say it to save face, Diane isn't getting a single dime of it." That statement violently turned every head in the yard. Diane looked a little amused, leaning back against the fence with her arms crossed. "She is just helping me manage the logistics," I said, projecting my voice. "Nothing more." Renee stared at me, totally lost, desperate, trying furiously to do the financial math in her head and coming up entirely empty. So I delivered the final payload. Most of what I've got, I said, looking right into my daughter's tear-filled eyes, is going to heavily fund full-ride scholarships for young people going into the manual trades, right here in Charlotte. Kids who want to learn how to work with their hands. Kids who want to build an honest life, doing exactly what I did. Nobody's made a sound. A warm breeze moved slowly through the high branches of the oak tree in the corner of the yard. And I swear to you, standing there in the wreckage of my family, all I felt was incredibly, profoundly light. For an entire year, I had carried the crushing weight of suspicion, the agonizing hurt of betrayal, and the terrifying uncertainty of not knowing if I was losing my mind. And right then, it was just gone, evaporated into the summer air. Renee shook her head slowly, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. Dad, why would you do that? The answer came far easier and far sharper than I ever expected. 'Cause honest opportunities like that are exactly what built my entire life, I said. I paused, letting the silence hold them. And because my future, Renee, belongs exclusively to me. She looked away. For a brief, tense moment, I thought she might try to fight it. Instead, she slowly stood up. Brad stood up beside her, shoulders slumped in total defeat. Neither looked at anyone in that yard. They didn't say goodbye. They just turned and walked silently across the freshly cut grass, walking past 30 years of family birthdays, cookouts, and Christmas mornings. Nobody stopped them. A minute later, I heard a car door slam shut, then another. I stood there and watched the taillights of their luxury SUV disappear down the road. For the first time in years, I didn't chase after my daughter. I didn't frantically call her. I didn't offer a hollow apology for something that was never mine to apologize for. I just stood there in the fading summer light and took a deep breath. I will be completely honest with you. I refuse to make this sound cleaner than it actually was. The morning after the cookout, I woke up before the sun. For a few blissful seconds, lying in the dark, everything felt fine. Then reality crashed back down. I remembered the tense silence, Brad's greedy mouth, my only child walking away without looking back. I lay there in bed, waiting to feel like I had won the war. I never did. That is the devastating part. Nobody warns you about when standing up to toxic family members. Standing up for yourself feels absolutely right, but permanently losing a piece of your family feels exactly like grief. The hardest lesson I had to learn is that those conflicting emotions live right next to each other. A week later, I officially closed on a little condo near the lake. It's modest, 1,200 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a small patio, and a beautiful sliver of deep blue water. It's perfect. At my age, I wasn't chasing an impressive lifestyle. I was chasing peace. Packing up the old brick ranch house wrecked me. Memories jumped out from behind dusty boxes. The long hallway where Renee raced her friends. The scratched kitchen table where she struggled through algebra. The wooden pantry door frame with faded pencil marks. I stood there staring at those marks longer than I would admit. Then I closed the door. Some chapters deserve respect, but they still have to end. The first few weeks at the condo were incredibly quiet. I started fishing again, and I started volunteering twice a week at a vocational trades school, teaching kids the basics of the hard work I had spent my life doing. That turned out to be one of my best decisions. Those kids reminded me of the young, hungry guys I used to hire. Some were cocky, some were lost, but most just needed one solid person to look them in the eye and believe they could amount to something. One hot afternoon, a 19-year-old named Marcus asked me how I got started. We sat on overturned buckets and talked for over an hour. Driving home, the truth finally hit me. For an entire year, I had been so intensely focused on defending what I built that I had completely forgotten why I built it. Teaching Marcus reminded me, helping the next generation build their foundation felt healthier and more rewarding than revenge ever did. Renee didn't call me, not in July, August, or September. The deafening silence hurt far worse than the fight did. Here is what I have finally come to understand. People love a perfectly clean story where the good guy decisively wins. Real life doesn't work like a movie script. Renee wasn't some cartoon villain. She was my daughter. She was the little girl who stubbornly wore bright yellow rain boots to church. The young woman who hugged me at her college graduation and whispered, "We did it, Dad." I can't erase those memories. I wouldn't if I could. The biggest tactical mistake most people make is believing you have to make a binary choice. You either help your family or you protect yourself. People act like it's one door or the other. What I finally understood is that those things are not opposites. You can love somebody with your entire heart and still absolutely refuse to let them take what is rightfully yours. That is not coldness. That is the only kind of love that survives. 4 months after that cookout, my cell phone rang on a quiet Tuesday night. The screen lit up, it said Renee. I sat there, looking at the screen, then I answered. Hello, a long pause, then a shaky voice. Hi, Dad. She sounded incredibly nervous. Older and hard experience. We talked very stiffly at first, about the weather and her job. Then, the real conversation came. She took a ragged breath and admitted she had been furious. Humiliated, completely destroyed by what happened at the party. I calmly said that I knew. She genuinely surprised me. She didn't ask a single question about the money, the trust, or the scholarships. Instead, she said something that broke my heart. I think I stopped seeing you as a person. Dad, that brutal admission hung in the air, heavy, honest. She kept going. Everything just turned into numbers. Financial plans, problems to aggressively solve. And I just kept telling myself I was being practical. I looked out my window at the dark water of the lake, and something tight inside my chest finally came loose. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but understanding. I wasn't perfect either, Renee, I told her quietly. I should have asked the hard questions a lot sooner, instead of just letting it rot. She laughed. It was a soft, broken sound, but it was the first real laugh I had heard from her in a long time. I'm sorry, Dad, 3 simple words, no elaborate excuses, just that. I closed my eyes. I had imagined that moment for months, and when it finally arrived, it was smaller and quieter than I pictured. And somehow, that made it mean more. We talked for nearly an hour. Trust takes a hell of a lot longer to rebuild than to destroy. But it was a fragile, tentative start. Right before we hung up, I told her the one thing I had been turning over in my mind. You never lost your father, Renee. The line went quiet. Then I said, but my life was never yours to manage. She didn't argue, she just said, I understand that now. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dark for a long time. Getting older has taught me a lot of hard lessons, but maybe the biggest one is this. The smartest, most effective revenge was never about hurting her back. It was about refusing to hand over my dignity just to keep a peace that was already broken. It was about standing my ground, steady enough that she finally saw exactly what she had let herself become. So let me ask you, before I go, if you had been standing in my backyard that day, do you think I did the right thing? Did I handle it the way a father should, or did I drop the hammer too hard? Tell me your thoughts down below. And if you've ever lived through something like this, if you've ever had somebody you loved start treating you like an asset instead of a human being, and tell me about it in the comments. Somebody else who reads your story might just find the nerve they've been needing to finally stand their ground. If this story resonated with you, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I share these stories because I believe the hard truths we speak out loud help the next person survive their battles. Stay sharp out there, and I'll see you in the next one.